other news today was the contract of Declan Chisholm. This is a two-way deal. I mean, listen, whatever he got, whether it's $775, $800,000, I mean, that was, we knew it was going to be right around there. And what do you make of the fact that it is a two-way deal and his situation not being waivers exempt coming into training camp for a spot on the Winnipeg Jets with a very, very packed defensive depth chart?
Yeah, I got to start with, like, if you're, my generation or older, you remember when two-way contracts meant that, they didn't need to be on waivers to go down. And we all know that's not the case anymore. So two-way, it's just a different salary if he plays for the Manitoba Moose. I think Ken Wee was the first to report that I think it's a $90,000 Manitoba Moose salary if he goes down, whereas if he is in the NHL, that's $775K. And that's a big difference for the player. And my guess is, if there's a reason why there was any holdup at all, it was probably the number attached to what his AHL salary would be. That's my best guess, or else it wouldn't be just a here's what the terms are for a guy with your experience at this point in his career. But I think the big question mark on everybody's mind with Declan Chisholm is, what kind of camp would he have to make the Winnipeg Jets clear a spot for him? He's lost that waivers exemption. We saw what happened to Jonathan Kovacevic a year ago and the success he had with Montreal after being claimed. And I think there's some fear in Jets land that maybe Chisholm would be claimed if waived. And that, for a team that prides itself on drafting and development, that had got to hurt at least a little bit. As proud as they'd be to say, hey, we're happy that he's having success somewhere else, I think that you want to keep your guys that you put so much time and development into. And it just points us back at that NHL logjam.
Well, and I mean, listen, we were both there in Nashville. That was a guy that I know we both kind of poked around and asked, hey, would this guy clear waivers? And there was a lot of people that said no, they thought that he'd be picked up. And I mean, listen, I will say this for the record. I will be shocked if it goes that way, if there's no changes and he comes in camp and they put him on waivers and send him down to the Manitoba Moose, and for the second year in a row, they lose a drafted player because there's no room. And it would be an extra shame with him, I think, in that he has shown a lot of promise at the American Hockey League level, and to lose a prospect like that without ever getting any real opportunity outside of those two games that he was called up, I believe, a couple seasons ago to play in the NHL, does seem contrary, frankly, to what the team is trying to build. But Murat, I mean, right now, reading the tea leaves, it's pretty hard to imagine that not happening. And then that's another significant risk of potentially losing, a player that may have a bright NHL future. And I'm sure, different people have different opinions on it. And the most important ones are obviously in those offices downtown. But it is very similar to what happened last year.
Yeah, 100%. It's similar, and you're right. Like, I remember Nashville and poking around, and I think a lot of people seem to think that he would get claimed. I wonder with Winnipeg if they have any opportunity to maybe change their tack in terms of the timing of putting him on waivers. I wonder how disappointing this would be for him as a person. But what if he were a relatively early cut compared to his ability level, in an attempt to time a day when waivers was absolutely chock full of players, or some sort of strategic thinking on that in that regard? Because, what else could possibly happen to solve this issue? Winnipeg can make a proactive trade, move veterans off of a team that is promising that it's trying to win now. How are you going to sell Connor Hellebuyck and Mark Scheifele on, hey, we're doing everything we can to win, if you move a capable veteran with a bad contract just to clear him out? Like, that's not a win now move necessarily. Somebody could get hurt, but that's a bad way to solve a problem, I think, that's not necessarily so proactive. And, it's a tough situation. It almost reminds me, and I guess this is a good argument in favor of holding on to guys as long as you can, but a couple of years ago, Dylan Samberg, he got hurt very early on in camp, and ironically, I think it was Jonathan Kovacevic he crashed into. But at that camp, Samberg could have had the greatest camp of his life, and there were too many players in front of him. Look how good he is now. Look at how solid he is on that third pair, and how I think a lot of people believe he can step into that second pair. You want to hold on to guys like that if you can. And I can't guarantee what Chisholm's outcome on waivers would be, but I'll be kind of nervous as a fan of some of his characteristics as a player, that Winnipeg could lose him that way.
I mean, the only scenario where I could see him being on the roster, I guess at the beginning of the season, barring some sort of a trade, would be Billy Heinola gets waived to the Moose, which I think is probably likely to happen regardless, just for all the same reasons that we're talking about the logjam for Declan Chisholm. And they make a decision that they don't want to even risk moving him, and they end up waiving Capobianco, who potentially goes to the Moose, plays on an NHL deal, because he's got a one-way deal this year. It was a two-way last year, I believe, but it is a one-way this year, and have Declan Chisholm as part of the top 7 or top 8. I mean, Logan Stanley, I get, again, potentially a move could happen with one of those players, but like, even if he's on the roster and you don't lose the asset, outside of significant injuries, Murat, it's pretty hard to see a path to him playing regularly at all at the National Hockey League level right now with the other guys that are there.
Yeah, that's the honest truth, isn't it? And I guess it's a shame to see players end up at that particular spot, and the timing of it and all of that. I mean, if you're Winnipeg, I guess you can make the argument you got bigger fish to fry, and a franchise goaltender and a number one center to sort out the futures of all of that sort of stuff. But he's a player that will have value, at least at the AHL level, but probably for an NHL team someday. My strongest impressions of him come from Manitoba Moose in the playoffs. I think it was 2 playoffs ago, pardon my grammar, where he was their best all-around defender in my mind in the few games that I saw. And I have so much time for what he can grow into as a player, and I definitely see NHL ceiling for him.
Just while we're at it, talking about the defense, Logan Stanley's at a real interesting crossroads, I would say. Listen, straight up, he got passed last year on the depth chart by Dylan Sandberg. And I don't think that's changing anytime soon. Now, maybe there's the opportunity for him to pass somebody else. But again, you've got experienced players, you've got veteran contracts, you've got all that. There's a lot into it. And then you've got these younger players that seemingly are ready to challenge for playing time there as well. Murat, where are you on Logan Stanley's situation coming into camp, what he can do to help his cause, but also what happens if he doesn't?
Yeah, I think he's in a similar situation in terms of what I would be looking for him to do at training camp as when he first broke into the NHL, which was a bit of a surprise. I mean, I think that shortened season, the Canadian division year where Logan Stanley had a really strong rookie season on the third pair, I think that was the best case scenario for that season. And the way that he impressed, in my mind, everybody talks about his size, and they see his size, and he's willing to drop the gloves sometimes too, so he's willing to stand up for his teammates. That's great. But they imagine that this is going to be a guy who dominates the game physically, and that's how he's going to have a success at the NHL level. The thing that he did, best for him, that cemented that NHL job in the first place, was he made smart outlet passes. He made quick turns, and he got away from pressure, and he avoided forecheckers, and he made his first pass to good spots that put pucks in good situations. And he was able to do that throughout training camp that year. He was able to do that on the third pairing as well. And I think that it's that sort of thing that helps just cement the fact that he's more than his size. And I think he's a bit miscast as a bruiser just because he's so big. And that's what I'm going to be looking for him. In addition to that, when training camp thins out, I should say, and it's a less minor leaguers and more NHL players, he's going to have to show that he and whoever his partner is can negotiate the reads. And when there's switches that they have to navigate, nobody's leaving somebody open. He's not getting beat backdoor, because I think that he's solid on the puck, and I believe in him to make those sorts of outlet passes. But there are certain situations where I think he's still getting beat by missed coverage situations. And I think that's what moved him off of the third pair last year, and would need to improve for him to be a full-time NHLer for me.
I agree with you on all of that. I do wonder if there's a way that if Logan Stanley just goes in and maybe comes in looking like a a different guy when it comes to his aggressiveness, his physicality. I mean, listen, we know the dude is 6'7", but I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, I've watched pretty much every game that the guy's played. Not too often where it really seems like he plays big, if you know what I mean. I wonder if there is a way, because we know why they drafted him. I mean, they thought that he had a lot of tools. They thought he could turn into a player that could be an absolute menace on the ice. I do wonder whether there's a way that he realizes that in a lot of ways this is a crossroads, and maybe comes out with a different look, and maybe tries to do some things, whether they come naturally to him or not, that put him in a better spot to compete for more playing time.
Yeah, just get yourself noticed, right? And get yourself noticed for good reasons. He has that in his toolkit. I think you're right. I don't think it comes natural. I think that that's not necessarily the way he would idealize playing the game, but he has it in his toolkit. He's capable of it. And I also believe, you know what? He's a really popular teammate. Guys like him. He gets along. Like, he's a very affable dude. People like him. Last year in the press box, he's always joking around with the other guys up there and things like that. Some of the smaller windows that we get into that, I think he's really well thought of amongst his teammates, and guys say good things about him. So if he can show everybody that he's willing to make the hit, drop the gloves, block the shot, all those cultural symbols of I'm there for you, he's going to get noticed. And I know Rick Bowness values those things too. It's just a matter of how high up in the lineup he can play when there's guys that, you know, can do a little bit more with the puck or better with his defensive reads.
Yeah. One thing when it comes to Big Stan is that, listen, he's a very polarizing player. I mean, you just look at chat. Some people have been done with him for a while. There's others that really do believe in him. And the one thing that I think, well, tell me if you disagree, even though, he didn't have a great season last year, only played in 19 games. If Logan Stanley hits the waiver wire, I don't think there's any question that there's at least one team in the National Hockey League that makes a claim in and tries to see if he can do something different wherever it is outside of Winnipeg.
Completely, absolutely. He's on that threshold of player, to be sure. I mean, he has capability, all of those sorts of things. Most importantly, he's unique, right? I think that a lot of teams have a lot of players in their pipeline that have similar skill sets. Logan Stanley is the sort of player who is not replicated on a lot of teams. We don't know if he has top four ceiling or what have you. If that guy hits, you can be optimistic about it. You can say that, hey, there's some diversity in the prospect pool as well. And I think that has appeal. People want to believe that the 6'7" player with that sort of good attitude and ability and all those sorts of things can grow into who they hope he will.